The operations briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. That particular combination of late nights, impossible decisions, and the kind of stress that no amount of cleaning could ever eliminate. The Pentagon's Sub-Level 3, where the war was run on spreadsheets and classified surveillance feeds, where young men and women became statistics, and statistics became policy. Admiral Marcus Hendricks stood at the head of the mahogany table, his dress blues pristine despite the 14-hour day that had already accumulated behind his eyes. Silver stars on his shoulders caught the fluorescent light like daggers, polished daily, symbols of authority that had become as much a burden as they were an honor. 20 years commanding, 20 years of making the calls that kept young soldiers alive or in the ground. 20 years of telling mothers and fathers that their sons weren't coming home. He'd aged in this role, not gracefully. The lines around his eyes had deepened from gray to white. His hair had abandoned any pretense of its original color, but his voice remained steady, authoritative, the voice of a man who had never second-guessed an order in his career and wasn't about to start now. "Next slide," he said, his eyes scanning the room with the precision of a man trained to read microexpressions, to catch the moment when someone was holding something back. 23 people sat in theater seating. Junior officers mostly, intelligence analysts, a few drone operators who just rotated back from theater. But there was one person who stood out, or rather, who was trying very hard not to stand out. Master Sergeant James Coulter sat 3 rows back, his ghillie suit folded on the empty chair beside him like a reminder of what he actually did for the military. He'd just come off a 72-hour deployment in the Hindu Kush, and the desert still lived in the creases of his face, in the way his skin had a gritty, sand-blasted quality, in the permanent squint around his eyes from staring through rifle scopes at horizons that wanted to kill him. Coulter was a ghost, not literally, but close enough that most people in the Pentagon didn't quite know how to talk to him. Special operations snipers existed in a category between soldier and weapon. They were necessary. They were effective. But there was something in their eyes, something that suggested they'd seen things that normal military personnel hadn't been trained to process. His hands were steady. His posture was military perfect. His eyes weren't, though. Those eyes were ancient. Those eyes had seen too many targets at too great a distance, had watched through magnified optics as men fell, as families scattered, as the mathematics of consequence played out in real time. Hendricks had read Coulter's file. 72 confirmed kills, 43 more probable, 3 commendations, 0 complaints filed against him, the perfect soldier, the perfect weapon. "Logistics report," Hendricks announced, flipping through the briefing papers without looking up. His assistant had compiled them perfectly, as always. Supply chain integrity at 97%. Equipment replacement cycles tracking on schedule. Personnel rotation schedules approved through Q4. The room nodded. These were the bureaucratic necessities that no one cared about but everyone needed. The machinery that turned war into routine. The Admiral continued turning pages. Budget allocations, training schedules, equipment maintenance protocols. This was the grinding, tedious work of command, the administrative weight that kept the system functioning. That's when Coulter shifted in his seat. Just slightly. A minor movement. The kind of thing that most people wouldn't even register. But Hendricks' eyes had been trained across 2 decades to catch the moment when a subordinate was about to say something they shouldn't. The moment when a soldier was about to break protocol. And there was something there, something that caught the light. Hendricks' eyes snapped up from the briefing papers, and his gaze locked onto Master Sergeant Coulter's chest. A badge. Not official regulation. Not something that should exist outside of special operations channels. But there it was, clipped to his service jacket beneath the formal dress uniform, worn against protocol, worn with the kind of deliberate visibility that suggested a man who was making a statement. The Admiral's jaw clenched. His hand, which had been turning pages, stopped mid-motion. The room didn't understand yet. They kept sitting, kept waiting for the next briefing slide, kept pretending this was a normal Thursday afternoon at the Pentagon. But Hendricks' entire body language had shifted. He rose slowly from his chair, not rapidly, not angrily, but with the controlled precision of a man descending into rage so profound that it had been distilled into pure focus. His eyes never left the badge. His shoulders straightened. His voice, when it came, was pitched low and controlled. "Master Sergeant Coulter," he said quietly. The room's attention shifted to Coulter. "Stand up." Coulter stood, slowly. His face remained neutral, but his eyes, those ancient, haunted eyes, locked directly with Hendricks' gaze. There was no apology in that expression, no fear, no attempt to justify or explain. Just acknowledgement that something had been seen. "Step outside, now," the Admiral ordered. Coulter moved toward the door without hesitation. He didn't salute. He didn't apologize. He didn't attempt to hide the badge. He simply walked, and with each step the tension in the room ratcheted higher. The other officers exchanged confused glances. Lieutenant Morrison leaned toward his neighbor and whispered something. But Hendricks didn't care about their questions. His attention was entirely focused on the fact that one of his soldiers had just violated a direct order by wearing a badge that shouldn't exist. In the hallway, under the harsh white light that existed nowhere else in the Pentagon, Hendricks finally saw the badge clearly. It was perhaps 3 inches across, worn metal, a symbol that he recognized immediately, a symbol that hadn't been worn in the military for 6 years, a symbol that had been officially decommissioned, its use forbidden, its existence scrubbed from the records. His face went pale, then red. "What in God's name is that?" His voice echoed off the concrete walls. "A reminder, sir," Coulter replied simply. "That is a forbidden insignia in this command." The Admiral's voice rose despite his intention to keep control. His hand moved toward the badge as if he might tear it off himself, then stopped, as if touching it might contaminate him. "Do you have any idea what wearing that means? Do you understand the position you're putting me in?" Coulter stood at parade rest, his face a mask of military professionalism, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't really listening to the words. He was listening to what the words meant. "Where did you get it?" Hendricks demanded, his voice now low again, which was somehow infinitely worse than if he'd kept shouting. "From someone who earned it, sir." The statement hung in the hallway between them like a grenade, with the pin already pulled. "Coulter, I'm going to ask you one more time and you're going to answer me truthfully. What is that badge?" The Master Sergeant took a moment. His jaw worked. His eyes moved away from Hendricks for just an instant, as if he was making a final decision about something that couldn't be unmade. When he looked back, something had shifted. "Sir," Coulter said quietly, "you're going to want to sit down for this." Hendricks felt his stomach drop. In his 20 years of command, he'd learned to read the micro-signals that preceded catastrophe. The way a subordinate's voice changed when they were about to report something that would alter everything. The way the world seemed to hold its breath before major events. This was that moment. "What are you talking about?" the Admiral asked, but his voice had lost its authority. "Not here, sir," Coulter replied. "But I need to tell you something about those 73 names in my operational log. I need to tell you about the people I killed in the last 18 months. And I need you to understand why someone would give a forbidden badge to a man who followed orders." Hendricks' face went white. The hallway seemed to tilt. "And sir," Coulter continued quietly, "I need to tell you about Captain Sarah Reeves." The Admiral's blood stopped moving. Captain Sarah Reeves was dead, killed in action 12 weeks ago. An ambush outside Kandahar. The report had crossed his desk personally. He'd signed the condolence letters. "That's impossible," Hendricks whispered. "No, sir," Coulter said, and for the first time, something like sadness crossed his face. What's impossible is pretending you didn't know what was happening in those operations. What's impossible is claiming you didn't understand why someone we were supposed to have mourned just walked off the military base alive and well, requesting a classified meeting with you. The Admiral opened his mouth to respond, to demand explanations, to assert his authority over this situation. But Coulter had already turned and started walking back toward the briefing room. "She's waiting, sir," the master sergeant said over his shoulder. "And the longer we stand here, the more people are going to wonder why you're having a crisis in a Pentagon hallway." Hendricks stood frozen, his dress uniform suddenly feeling like it didn't fit anymore. Around him, the Pentagon's machinery ground on, officers moving through corridors, phones ringing, the endless business of military administration. But nothing felt real anymore. Because standing in that hallway, Hendricks understood that his entire understanding of reality had just fractured. And the fracture was only beginning to expand. Hendricks' private office was a museum of military achievement, photographs of him with presidents, framed commendations, a wall of service medals that spanned 4 decades, the office of a man who had done everything right, the office of a man who had climbed as high as the system would allow. The door locked behind them with an audible click. Coulter placed a worn leather journal on the Admiral's desk with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. The cover was scarred, stained with what might have been blood or desert dust or both. The leather was cracked from handling, from being carried in a rucksack across 1,000 kilometers of hostile terrain. It looked like evidence. It looked like a confession. Hendricks didn't touch it. He stood behind his desk, staring at the journal the way someone might stare at a live grenade. "That's not regulation," he said flatly, his voice stripped of emotion. "Personal logs are classified at minimum. Combat journals are supposed to be filed through official channels, reviewed by command, cross-referenced with operational reports." "Read it anyway, sir," Coulter said. He didn't ask, he stated it as a fact. "I'm ordering you to tell me where this came from," Hendricks replied, still not touching the journal. "I'm ordering you to explain how you came to be carrying unauthorized documentation into a Pentagon briefing. I'm ordering you to give me one good reason why I shouldn't have you arrested right now for violating the Espionage Act." "Because," Coulter said quietly, "if you arrest me, the contents of that journal go to someone else. Someone who won't understand the context. Someone who won't have the authority or the clearance to contain what's inside those pages." The Admiral's jaw tightened. He reached for the journal with the reluctance of a man reaching into a fire. The first entry was dated 14 months ago, not in theater, not on some distant military base, but in Washington, D.C., in a hotel room blocks from the Capitol building. Entry 1. Target ACQRED, Senator James Milbrook's aide. Below the entry, coordinates, a photograph, a detailed account of surveillance, and then a single tally mark. Confirmed deceased. Hendricks' knuckles went white as he gripped the journal's edges. He turned the page. More names, more coordinates, more marks. The entries were meticulous, professional, written in the careful hand of a man who understood that he was documenting either heroic service or war crimes, and suspected it was both. HAJJI Commander coordinating IED network. Confirmed 3 strikes on coalition CONVOYS. ISIS recruiter OPERATING in civilian market. Family connections to terrorist FINANCING. Taliban weapons facilitator. 47 confirmed DEATHS attributed to his supply lines. But mixed in with these entries that looked like legitimate military targets, were others. Journalist INVESTIGATING, military contracts, known contact with Washington Post. Afghan official REQSTING, audit of U.S. military EXPNDITURES, civilian casualty count. pharmaceutical executive with connections, 2, Senate Oversight Committee. Each one had a date, each one had coordinates, each one had a tally mark beside it. Hendricks turned page after page and his breathing became more shallow. The entries spanned months. Some were clustered in brief windows of time, suggesting multiple operations in quick succession. Others were spread across weeks, suggesting careful planning, patient execution. The handwriting never wavered. The entries never showed doubt. "How many?" Hendricks whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet of the office. 73 confirmed, Coulter said from behind him. His voice was flat, factual. 86 unconfirmed but probable. 159 people. Hendricks felt the room tilt. He sat down slowly in his chair, the journal still open in his hands. "You're telling me you've killed?" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "I'm telling you what I was ordered to do, sir." Hendricks looked up sharply. "Not like this, not with records, not with," he gestured at the journal, his hand shaking slightly. "This reads like a confession, like a trophy, like the documentation of a man who's keeping score." "It's a witness statement," Coulter said quietly. "Witness statements are filed with command. They're reviewed, they're classified. They're not kept in personal journals carried through a Pentagon building." Hendricks stood up, the journal still in his hands. He began packing, something he rarely did. "This is insubordination. This is psychological breakdown. I'm ordering a psychiatric evaluation." "My psych evaluation came back clean 3 months ago, sir." Hendricks stopped packing. "You've been through evaluation?" "Yes, sir. Clean bill of mental health. Recommended for continued active duty. No signs of PTSD or trauma-induced psychological breakdown." The Admiral felt his foundation cracking. If Coulter had passed psychiatric evaluation, if he'd been formally assessed and cleared for continued service, then this wasn't a rogue soldier having a breakdown. This was something far more intentional. "Then you're acting on your own," Hendricks said, trying to understand. "You're operating outside your chain of command." "No, sir," Coulter interrupted, his voice still calm. "Every single name in that journal was approved by command. Every shot was authorized. Every kill was legal under the rules of engagement." The Admiral felt the words hit him like physical blows. He set the journal down on his desk as if it had burned him. "Then why?" Hendricks demanded. "Why keep records? Why the badge? Why are you trying to provoke me?" "Because you need to see it," Coulter replied. "I don't need to see anything except a court-martial." Hendricks' voice rose now, his military composure finally cracking. "Coulter, do you understand what you're asking me to process? Do you understand what this means?" "Yes, sir, I understand exactly what it means." Hendricks stood behind his desk, his hands braced against the mahogany surface. The photographs on the wall behind him, images of him shaking hands with presidents, of him being honored for valor, of him representing the best of military service, suddenly felt like artifacts from a different reality. "What are you saying?" Hendricks asked quietly. "Explain it to me, because right now I'm hearing that every operation I authorized, every target I approved resulted in deaths that were, what? Illegal, unjustified." "I'm saying," Coulter replied carefully, "that I didn't do anything you haven't authorized, that I didn't kill anyone you didn't order killed, that every name in that journal has been filed, processed, and justified through proper military channels." "But," Hendricks prompted, "but some of those people shouldn't have been targets. Some of those people were obstacles to men in power who wanted something removed from their way. Some of those people died because eliminating them was profitable to people in your chain of command." Hendricks sat down slowly. His office suddenly felt smaller, darker, like a cage that had been closing around him without him noticing. "That's an extremely serious allegation, Master Sergeant." "It's not an allegation, sir. It's documented fact. There are 73 names in that journal, 42 of them were targeted because they posed legitimate security threats. 31 of them were targeted because they threatened specific financial interests. The remaining unconfirmed targets, Coulter paused. The remaining targets are the ones I had doubts about. If you had doubts, Hendricks said slowly, why did you pull the trigger? Because I was ordered to, sir. Because the authorization came from the top. Because I learned long ago that if you question every order, you don't stay in the military long. The Admiral picked up the journal again. He flipped to a page marked with what looked like a blood stain. Captain Sarah, REVS, INVESTIGTNG Financial DISCREPNCIES, marked for elimination. Below this entry, there was no tally mark. Hendricks' blood turned to ice. Where is she? He asked, his voice hollow. Sir, you're about to find out, Coulter replied. Hendricks' secure phone buzzed on his desk. One message, one name, a message that would change what the Admiral thought he understood about his entire military career. The name on the screen made his breath stop. Captain Sarah, REVS, need to see you, classified, Coulter's involved, someone's covering something up. Below the message, a code that shouldn't exist outside of a unit that had been deactivated 6 years ago, a code that only 12 people in the entire military would recognize. Hendricks looked up from the phone to Coulter. What have you done? The Admiral whispered. What you should have done 18 months ago, sir, Coulter replied. I've told the truth, and now we're going to have to decide what we do about it. The Admiral's office, that museum of achievement, that temple to military success, suddenly felt like a room built on quicksand. Everything he thought he understood was about to be pulled from beneath his feet. In Part 2 extended, Captain Reeves is alive. The journal documents more than just military kills, and Hendricks is being pulled into a conspiracy that involves senators, black finance, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened powerful people. What happens when an admiral discovers that his entire career has been built on authorizing murders that had nothing to do with national security? The name on the screen meant nothing. And it meant everything. Captain Sarah Reeves, dead for 12 weeks, killed in action during an ambush outside Kandahar. The report had been filed through proper channels, reviewed by the Joint Chiefs, and included in the casualty briefing that Hendricks had personally delivered to the Pentagon Press Corps. Her parents had received a folded flag at Arlington. Her widow's benefits had been processed and approved. Except she was alive. And she was telling Admiral Marcus Hendricks that Coulter was involved in something that required classified information to discuss. Hendricks stared at the message for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. His mind was moving through scenarios, running calculations, trying to construct a framework that would make sense of what he was seeing. How is this possible? He asked, his voice not quite steady. Captain Reeves was the one who gave me the badge, Coulter said simply. The Admiral's eyes snapped up from the phone. That's impossible. She was KIA in an operation that wasn't supposed to happen, sir. Hendricks set the phone down carefully on his desk. His hands were shaking. He clasped them together to hide the tremor, a useless gesture since Coulter could clearly see it. Explain, the Admiral ordered. Coulter moved to the window that overlooked the Pentagon's inner courtyard. 5 stories below, officers were moving between buildings, conducting the normal business of military administration. The morning was clear, beautiful, even. The kind of day that had nothing to do with conspiracies or dead captains who were apparently still alive. Captain Reeves was the liaison between Special Operations and the Financial Audit Division, Coulter began, his voice the calm, measured tone of a soldier giving an after-action report. Her job was to verify that the money we were spending in theater matched the operational reports we were filing. It was a routine position. Security clearance, yes, but nothing that suggested she'd stumble onto anything significant. But she did, Hendricks said. Yes, sir. She started noticing patterns. Equipment that wasn't showing up where it should have been. Expenditures listed for operations that didn't exist on any official manifest. Money being moved through accounts that shouldn't exist, shell companies, foreign banks, cryptocurrency exchanges. Hendricks moved to his own window. The Pentagon was a fortress designed to protect the nation's secrets, and apparently to contain them, to keep them buried so deep that even senior command didn't know the truth about what was happening in the shadows. "How much money are we talking about?" the Admiral asked quietly. $23 million, sir, over 18 months, moved through accounts with ties to 3 sitting senators. The words hung in the air like a confession. 3 sitting senators, elected officials, men and women who set military policy, who voted on defense budgets, who shaped the future of American foreign policy. And they were using military operations to hide it, Hendricks said. It wasn't a question. More than hide it, sir. They were profiting from it, using special operations as a front to eliminate competition, political, financial, corporate, anyone who threatened their interests. Hendricks sat back down. The journal was still open on his desk, the entries staring at him like accusations. When did Reeves discover this? 14 months ago. She started building a case. Financial documents, email trails, communication records. She was going to take it to the FBI. What happened? Command found out, Coulter said simply, and they made a decision. Hendricks understood without needing to hear it spelled out. They decided to eliminate her. They decided she was a liability. An operation was arranged. An ambush outside Kandahar, staged to look like Taliban activity. Reeves was supposed to die with 6 other soldiers. Clean, neat, case closed. But she didn't die. No, sir. She got out. She's been in hiding for 12 weeks, gathering additional evidence, waiting for the right moment to make contact with someone in command who could be trusted. And she decided that person was me, Hendricks said quietly. She decided that you're old enough to remember when military service meant something, sir, when it wasn't just about profit and political power. Hendricks moved away from the window. His office suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in with each breath he took. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Pentagon Row, safe house in the northeast quadrant. She's been waiting for your contact, preparing the evidence, documenting everything." Hendricks was already moving toward his door. Then he stopped. "How do I know this isn't a setup?" he asked quietly. "How do I know Reeves isn't part of something deeper? How do I know this isn't an elaborate operation designed to compromise me?" "You don't, sir," Coulter replied. "That's why it's dangerous." Hendricks grabbed his jacket. His hands were steadier now. Fear and adrenaline had focused him, sharpened his instincts. 40 years of military service had prepared him for many things, but not this. Not the moment when you discovered that the institution you devoted your life to protecting was rotting from the inside. He reached for his phone to call for transportation. Coulter stopped him. "Sir, you need to understand something before you go anywhere. If you make official contact with Captain Reeves, if you authenticate her location and begin accessing the evidence she's compiled, you become complicit in what comes next." "I'm already complicit," Hendricks replied. "Every authorization I've signed, every target I've approved, I'm already part of this." "No, sir. You're a part of something you didn't understand. But once you know the truth, once you move to act on it, you're committing treason against your own chain of command." Hendricks looked at Coulter directly. The master sergeant's face was ancient with the weight of what he was saying. "Is that what this is?" the Admiral asked. "Treason." "It's the truth, sir, and the truth is often treasonous to those in power." Hendricks used his secured phone to summon a vehicle, not his usual driver, not his official car, just a simple sedan from the secure motor pool. He was already thinking like a conspirator, already understanding that every action would be monitored, every movement tracked. "We need to move now," Coulter said. "Once Reeves surfaces, they'll be looking for her, and anyone who meets with her becomes a target by association." They moved through the Pentagon's corridors with the purpose of military officers going about routine business. No one stopped them. No one questioned an admiral and a master sergeant moving through the building. Camouflage came in many forms, and sometimes the best disguise was simply acting like you belonged. The sedan was waiting at the loading dock. No driver, keys already in the ignition. As Hendricks pulled out of the Pentagon, heading toward Pentagon Row, toward Captain Sarah Reeves, toward the evidence that would either save him or destroy him, Coulter said something quietly. "Sir, there's one more thing you should know." "What?" "When I told you that Reeves was alive, when I explained about the senators and the financial scheme, I didn't come to you on my own initiative." Hendricks' hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the moment you opened that journal, someone knew. Someone in command structure got a notification, and they're making phone calls right now, trying to figure out how to contain this." "How could they know?" Hendricks demanded. "Because I told them, sir." Hendricks felt his blood freeze. He nearly swerved into the next lane. He forced himself to steady the car. "Coulter, what have you done?" "I've forced a choice," the master sergeant replied calmly. "I've told Joint Operations that you made contact with Captain Reeves. I've told them you're heading to her location. I've told them that you now know about the conspiracy." "You've compromised her location." Hendricks' voice rose. I've just forced you to decide, sir," Coulter interrupted, his voice steady and certain. "Because in the next 15 minutes, that safe house is either going to be defended by every loyal soldier who understands what happened here, or Captain Reeves is going to vanish permanently. And you," Coulter locked eyes with him, "you're going to have to choose which side you're on." Hendricks' mind was fragmenting. The Pentagon was fatting behind him. The civilian city was growing ahead. And somewhere in that gray zone between military authority and civilian refuge, Captain Sarah Reeves was waiting. Or she was being hunted. And Hendricks had less than 15 minutes to figure out which. The safe house was a nondescript 4-story brownstone on a tree-lined street in Arlington. The kind of building that blended into the neighborhood so completely that your eyes slid past it without registering. Red brick, white shutters, a small front porch with a bench that no one ever sat on. It looked like the home of a retired accountant or a middle-level government employee. Exactly the kind of invisibility that made it perfect for hiding a captain who was supposed to be dead. Hendricks pulled the sedan to the curb 3 buildings down in shadow, out of direct sight lines. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel, not from fear, though fear was present, but from the weight of the choice he was about to make. "She's in the 3rd floor rear," Coulter said quietly. "She'll see us coming." "How do you know all of this?" Hendricks asked. "Because I've been planning this for 6 months, sir. Since the moment I understood what those 73 names meant." Hendricks looked at his master sergeant with new understanding. This wasn't a soldier following orders. This was a soldier who had made a unilateral decision to expose corruption at the highest levels. A soldier who had been gathering intelligence, building a case, waiting for the right moment to detonate the truth like an IED in the Pentagon's basement. They moved toward the brownstone with military precision, not rushing, not slow, just the purposeful walk of men who belonged where they were going. The front door opened without Coulter needing to knock. A woman stood in the doorway wearing tactical gear and a Glock 19 on her hip. Captain Sarah Reeves. She looked nothing like the photograph in Hendricks' personnel files. That photo showed a clean-cut officer with regulation hair and a formal smile. This woman had the appearance of someone who'd been living on adrenaline and purpose for 12 weeks. Her eyes had a feverish intensity. Her skin had that particular pallor of someone avoiding sunlight. But those eyes, Those eyes recognized Hendricks with something that might have been relief. "Admiral," she said, her voice sharp and tactical. "We need to move. Now, there's a vehicle approaching from the north, military pattern." They were inside in seconds. The safe house smelled like old coffee and the specific staleness of a place that had been sealed against the outside world. The windows were covered with blackout curtains. Computer monitors glowed in the back room. Files were stacked on every available surface. "How much time?" Hendricks asked. 2 minutes, maybe 3, Reeves replied. She moved to the window, cracking it just enough to observe the street. "They're moving fast, professional unit." Coulter was already at the back of the house, opening a rear exit that led to an alley. Cars parked 2 blocks south, northeast corner, keys under the mat. "You've thought of everything," Hendricks observed. "Not everything, sir," Reeves said. She was checking her weapon with practiced efficiency, inserting a fresh magazine, chambering a round. "I planned for capture or death. I didn't plan for you actually showing up." "Coulter told me." "I know what Coulter told you," Reeves interrupted. She moved to the second floor, her weapon up, her movements economical and precise. "And I know he told command about this location, which means they'll be coming with overwhelming force, not finesse, which means they're planning to contain this, not contain us." The sound of an engine cut through the morning, tires rolling slowly down the street, reconnaissance, checking the buildings. Reeves moved into position at the second-floor window. "When that vehicle stops, we move fast. Coulter, you take the Admiral south. I'll provide suppressive fire and catch up." "Negative," Hendricks said. "You come first, you're the evidence." "Sir, with respect, I'm not the evidence. The evidence is in my head and in the files on that computer. I'm just the person who knows how to read it, which makes me less valuable than you think." The vehicle stopped directly in front of the brownstone. Hendricks counted 4 soldiers emerging, military tactical gear, not Pentagon security, something darker, something private. He recognized the uniform pattern, private military contractors, the kind of force that operated in gray zones where official military couldn't tread. "Go," Reeves said. Gunfire erupted from the second floor, precise, controlled bursts that sent the contractors scrambling for cover. Hendricks and Coulter moved, running through the house toward the rear exit, toward the alley, toward the car that supposedly waited 2 blocks south. Behind them, Reeves continued laying down suppressive fire. Each shot was calculated to push the contractors back without killing anyone. Not yet. This was about containment, about keeping them pinned long enough to escape. They hit the alley running. The morning air hit Hendricks like a physical shock. He was 58 years old, a desk officer for the last 5 years, and he was running through the streets of Arlington like a man half his age. His lungs burned. His legs protested. But his mind was sharp, survival instinct overriding everything else. "There," Coulter pointed to a motorcycle parked in an alcove between buildings. "Not a car, a motorcycle." Reeves appeared from behind them, moving fast, her weapon tucked against her body. She vaulted onto the bike with the kind of physical grace that came from specialized training. Combat cyclists, a specialty Hendricks had never heard of outside of classified briefings. "Get on," she ordered, kicking the engine to life. The motorcycle screamed down the alley. Hendricks gripped Coulter's shoulders as they accelerated. Behind them, contractors emerged from the buildings, calling out positions into radios. Reeves navigated the city streets with the precision of someone who'd studied every route, every intersection, every possibility for escape. She wove through traffic, used alleys, cut through residential neighborhoods. The sedan that had been following them earlier, Hendricks could see it 2 blocks back, trying to maintain pursuit but losing distance. More vehicles were appearing now, a coordinated response, military precision applied to civilian streets. "Underground garage," Reeves shouted over the engine noise. "Pentagon Row, 3 blocks east." She banked hard onto a ramp that led downward, into the depths beneath the Pentagon's outer rings. Security barriers came down too late. She accelerated through them, the motorcycle's engine echoing off concrete walls. The underground garage was a maze of parked cars, support pillars, and fluorescent lights. Reeves brought the bike to a hard stop near a service elevator. "Out," she commanded. They dismounted. Around them, the sounds of pursuit echoed down the ramp. Multiple vehicles, multiple units. The scope of the response told Hendricks everything he needed to know about how high this conspiracy actually reached. Reeves pulled a key card from her tactical vest and swiped it against the elevator lock. The doors hissed open. Before they could step inside, an armored convoy surrounded the parking garage. Soldiers in full tactical gear sealed every exit. The sound of boots, the training calls of experienced military, equipment hitting pavement with precise synchronization. A voice came through a loudspeaker, cold and official. "This is Colonel Diane Chen, acting commander of base security. Master Sergeant Coulter, Captain Reeves, and Admiral Hendricks, you are ordered to surrender immediately. You are in violation of the Espionage Act and the Military Code of Justice. Resistance will result in lethal force." Hendricks felt the walls closing in. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. Every choice he'd made in the last 4 hours had committed him further into treason. Reeves, Coulter, and Hendricks stood facing the elevator as soldiers moved into position, weapons drawn, covering every angle of escape. "We're out of options," Hendricks said quietly. That's when Colonel Diane Chen stepped out of the crowd of soldiers. She was young, late 30s, with the bearing of someone who'd been trained in military command but had never lost her humanity. She looked at them with an expression that was part anger, part sorrow. "Stand down," she ordered her unit. The soldiers hesitated, uncertain. "I said stand down. All units converge on the northern exit. Admiral Hendricks, Captain Reeves, and Master Sergeant Coulter just left the building. They're heading north. Move now." The soldiers moved, confused but following the direct order from their commanding officer. Chen turned to face the 3 fugitives directly. When she spoke, her voice was low, barely audible over the sound of departing soldiers. "General Marcus Webb is my grandfather," she said quietly. "My mother never knew. She died thinking he was a hero. I've been trying to gather evidence for 3 years, waiting for someone inside to flip." She stepped closer, and they could see tears on her face. "I've been helping you this whole time," Chen continued. "The soldiers chasing you, they're not my unit. They're Webb's private security team disguised in military uniforms, but I've reported it. The real army is coming. The real investigators, people who can't be corrupted." She pulled out her phone. "I've already sent the evacuation order. By the time anyone gets down here, you need to be gone. There's a service exit to the east. It leads to a hospital basement. From there, you can disappear into the city." Hendricks stared at her. "Why would you help us?" "Because I want my mother's name cleared," Chen said. "Because someone needs to tell people that General Webb didn't become corrupt. He was built that way. And because the people he's hurt deserve to know the truth." She handed Reeves a car key. "Gray sedan 3 blocks north. It's clean, not in any system. The address programmed into the GPS is a safe house. Real safe house. No one I've told." Reeves took the key. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Chen said. "Just survive long enough to testify. The media is already moving. Someone leaked the story to the Washington Post. Within the next 2 hours, it'll be everywhere. And when it is, you need to be somewhere that the real military can protect you, not the people who are trying to keep you quiet." The sound of boots echoed through the tunnel. Multiple units, multiple weapons. "Go," Chen said. She turned to face the approaching soldiers stepping into their path. "The Admiral is a traitor. He's armed and extremely dangerous. All units converge on the northern exit." Hendricks, Reeves, and Coulter ran. Behind them, Chen's voice echoed through the parking garage like a final benediction. "The Admiral is a traitor." But her eyes, in that moment before they disappeared into the service exit, told them she meant something different entirely. The farmhouse was 40 miles outside the city, hidden in a forest that smelled like pine and decay and the particular emptiness of places that had been abandoned by civilization. It belonged to a government contractor, the kind of person who existed in the space between military and civilian, who asked no questions and provided accommodations for people who needed to disappear. There was a coffee maker, flowers in a vase, dead flowers, probably weeks old, basic furniture, and a large room in the back with blackout curtains where Reeves had set up her operation. The television played on mute, but the words weren't necessary. The images told the story in real time. Military corruption exposed. Senators linked to black OPS funding. WEBB investigation, WIDENS2, Pentagon level. The story had broken 12 hours ago. A Washington Post investigative reporter had received an anonymous package containing financial documents, email transcripts, and photographs of clandestine meetings. The evidence was airtight enough that even the Pentagon's communications division couldn't deny it. General Marcus Webb was shown on screen being led out of his home in handcuffs, his face blank with the shock of a man who'd never imagined accountability could reach him. Hendricks sat at a wooden table that could have belonged to anyone's grandmother, watching his career's architect being destroyed in real time. He should have felt vindicated. He should have felt righteous. Instead, he felt nothing but a hollow, aching weight. "You're in shock," Reeves said. She was sitting across from him, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. She hadn't changed out of her tactical gear. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, which she hadn't. "I authorized 73 deaths," Hendricks said quietly. "How many of those signatures on that evidence do you think are mine?" Reeves didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. Coulter was in the other room, on a secure phone line, speaking to federal agents who'd been coordinated by Colonel Chen's people. The real military. The ones who couldn't be corrupted because they represented something that still existed within the system, a belief that institutions were supposed to serve the people, not themselves. "We should eat," Reeves said finally. "You haven't eaten since this started. Your blood sugar is." "I don't want to eat," Hendricks interrupted. "I want to understand what I've done." He stood up and moved to the back room where Reeves had spread out the files. Thousands of pages, financial documents, email transcripts, photographs, surveillance videos, the entire architecture of corruption laid bare. He began reading. WEBB2, Senator Milbrook. "The operation in Kandahar is proceeding as discussed. The target will be eliminated within 72 hours. Full plausible deniability maintained. The profit-sharing arrangement remains intact." Milbrook's response: "Excellent. The pharmaceutical contract is ready for approval once this target is removed. The quarterly disbursement will be $3 million to the Shell account." Hendricks' hands shook as he read. These weren't abstract discussions of military strategy. These were concrete conversations about specific people being murdered for profit. He pulled out a financial document, a shell company registered in Delaware, wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. The routing numbers led to accounts controlled by 3 senators, a handful of corporate executives, and his stomach dropped. His own predecessor, General Marcus Webb. "There's more," Reeves said quietly from the doorway. "There's something we didn't tell you yet because we weren't sure it was real until yesterday." Hendricks looked up. "Your wife," Reeves continued. "She didn't leave you because of the scandal. She left you because she knew what you were doing and she couldn't be married to you anymore." The words hit Hendricks like a physical blow. "She knew." She's been aware of the black ops for 3 years. She saw financial transfers in your accounts that didn't match your official salary. She asked you about them. You told her it was classified. She didn't believe you. Hendricks sat down hard. His wife of 32 years had known. She'd watched him sign the authorizations, watched him come home, watched him sleep peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the world people were dying because he'd written his name on a document. And she'd left him because she couldn't stomach the complicity. Why didn't she report it? Hendricks asked. Because reporting it would have meant destroying her husband publicly, Reeves replied. Because people who try to expose corruption from inside military families tend to disappear. Because your wife understood that by staying silent, she was protecting herself and her children, and that was a calculus she could live with. That's a lie, Hendricks said. That's not. Check the emails in folder 7, Reeves interrupted. There's a message from your wife to her sister, dated 18 months ago. She discusses her suspicions about the money. She discusses her fears about what you're involved in. She discusses the night you came home and told her you'd authorized an operation that would result in the death of a civilian to eliminate a higher value target. Hendricks didn't move. He didn't want to read those emails, didn't want to see the moment when his wife had lost respect for him. But he did. And there it was, dated March 15th, 2 years ago, his wife writing to her sister, I don't recognize the man I married anymore. He's complicit in something terrible, and when I ask him about it, he just tells me it's classified. How do you stay married to someone who's become a weapon? The date was 3 days after Hendricks had authorized the operation that killed journalist Hassan Malik, a man who'd been investigating American military contractors in Pakistan. Hassan Malik had been 32 years old. He'd had a wife and 3 children. The official report had labeled him a terrorist sympathizer. Hendricks had signed the authorization without reading the full file. He understood now that his wife had tried to reach him, had tried to make him see, and he'd refused. Your children know too, Reeves continued, her voice gentle but relentless. They read the security clearance debriefing that was filed after your wife left. They understand that their father is a man who authorized murders, that their father chose military authority over moral responsibility. Hendricks felt something break inside him. The compartmentalization that had kept him functional for 20 years, the ability to separate the paperwork from the consequences, shattered completely. He sat on the floor of the farmhouse, surrounded by files that documented his complicity, and he wept. Not for himself, for Hassan Malik, for the 73 people in Coulter's journal, for his wife who tried to reach him and failed, for his children who'd grown up thinking their father was a hero when he was actually a bureaucrat of death. Coulter appeared in the doorway. He said nothing, just sat down on the floor beside the Admiral and waited. After a long time, Hendricks asked, "What happens now?" "Now we give the evidence to the federal investigators," Coulter replied. "Now you testify. Now we let the system work the way it's supposed to work." "The system is broken," Hendricks said hollowly. "The system is what created this." "Yes," Coulter agreed, "but it's the only system we have. And sometimes the only way to fix something broken is to break it further, to expose it so completely that it has to be rebuilt." Hendricks looked at his master sergeant. "You knew. From the beginning you knew what you were going to do. This whole thing, the badge, the journal, leading me to Reeves, you orchestrated it." "Yes, sir." "Why not just go to the FBI yourself?" "Because an admiral going to the FBI with accusations against the Joint Chiefs would have been buried before he finished his first sentence," Coulter replied. "But an admiral who's been forced into evidence, who's been compromised and has become a fugitive seeking sanctuary, that admiral has credibility. That admiral has skin in the game. That admiral's testimony means something because he's lost everything." Hendricks understood. He'd been a pawn in Coulter's operation, just as much as the 73 people had been pawns in the conspiracy's operation. Coulter had used him, manipulated him, destroyed his life in pursuit of a larger truth. And Hendricks understood that he deserved it. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Admiral, the FEDS are moving against WEBB, but someone in your chain of command is trying to destroy the evidence. Trust anyone you haven't met in person. Not everyone who fights corruption is on your side. Some people just want to rearrange the deck. CHAIRS. CHEN." Hendricks read the message 3 times. "There's more," he said quietly. Coulter's jaw tightened. "What?" "She's saying someone is still trying to contain this, which means our problems aren't over, which means we're not safe here." Outside the farmhouse windows, the forest was growing darker. The sun was setting, and somewhere in the Pentagon, someone was making calculations about how to eliminate the 3 people who'd become the greatest threat to the military-industrial complex's profit margins. Hendricks stood up slowly. He was no longer Admiral Marcus Hendricks. He was something else now, a broken man, a penitent weapon, a fugitive who understood finally what his choices had cost. "Coulter," he said, "we need to move. They're still coming." "Yes, sir, I know." "And you knew they would be." "Yes, sir, I did." Hendricks didn't ask why Coulter hadn't warned him. Some questions didn't have answers, only the understanding that survival required sacrifice, and the cost of truth was always higher than anyone wanted to pay. The safe house was in Maryland, hidden behind a wall of federal protection and media blackout orders. But the legal battle was being fought in the open, in hearing rooms and newspaper columns and the relentless machinery of institutional accountability. Congressman Michael Alvarez stood before the House Armed Services Committee, and his voice was cutting through 40 years of military silence. "Admiral Marcus Hendricks has provided testimony regarding the systematic elimination of targets that had no connection to national security," Alvarez stated, his eyes moving across the committee members one by one. 73 individuals killed over an 18-month period. 73 deaths authorized by senior military command for purposes of financial gain and political advantage. The hearing room was packed. Media cameras, families of victims, congressional staff taking notes with the fervor of people who understood they were witnessing history. Hendricks sat in the gallery, watching Alvarez deliver testimony that would normally have ended his military career immediately. But Hendricks was already gone, already transformed into something else, a witness, a penitent, a man seeking redemption through exposure. Behind him sat Master Sergeant James Coulter, wearing his Class A uniform for the first time since this all began. His service record was impeccable. His testimony was devastating. Every name in his journal had been cross-referenced with military authorization records, with financial transactions, with congressional signatures approving those transactions. The mathematics were perfect. The guilt was indisputable. "General Marcus Webb," Alvarez continued, "authorized the assassination of Captain Sarah Reeves, a military officer whose only crime was investigating financial irregularities in special operations budgets. When she survived this assassination attempt, General Webb coordinated with 3 sitting senators to contain the investigation and destroy evidence." The room erupted, not in shock. The story had been breaking for 72 hours now, but in the vindication of what had been rumors confirmed as hard facts. Hendricks turned to look at Coulter. The master sergeant's face was unreadable, the trained blankness of a soldier testifying under oath, of a man who'd killed 73 people and was now testifying about each one. In the back of the hearing room, someone was filming everything for social media. The image was already propagating across every platform. Master Sergeant James Coulter in uniform, his jaw set, reciting the names of the dead. Each name was a ghost. Each name was a person whose family would finally receive answers instead of lies. The next hearing happened in Senate. Senator Patricia Chen, no relation to Colonel Diane Chen, stood before her colleagues with a folder containing evidence that implicated 3 of them directly. Senators Millbrook, Harrison, and Rodriguez received payment distributions totaling $14 million, she said, her voice steady and deadly. In exchange, they approved military budgets that provided cover for assassination operations that eliminated threats to their corporate partners. She turned directly to address the cameras. These are not abstract allegations. These are financial transactions. These are email conversations. These is recorded testimony from military officers who carried out these operations under orders from senators sitting in this chamber. Senator James Millbrook stood up. His face was white. His voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm, the calm of a man whose entire world was collapsing, but who was too trained to show panic. I'd like to state for the record that all of my actions were taken in the interests of national security and consistent with my understanding of military necessity. Your understanding was purchased, Senator Chen replied coldly. $14 million purchased a very specific understanding of military necessity. The vote came swiftly: expulsion from the Senate, criminal referral to the Department of Justice. The machinery of accountability, once it started moving, had tremendous momentum. Meanwhile, Captain Sarah Reeves was fighting a different kind of battle. The FBI had assigned her a protective detail, but she wasn't hiding. She was coordinating the release of additional evidence, files that had been held back, briefing materials that showed the conspiracy's full scope, recorded conversations between military contractors and government officials discussing profit margins on assassination contracts. The evidence was obsessive in its detail: names, amounts, specific operations, dates, everything. Reeves sat in a secured office at FBI headquarters, reviewing the latest batch of financial documents with federal investigators. Her hands were steady, but her voice had the thin quality of someone running on nothing but purpose. "This one," she said, pointing to a transaction dated 16 months ago. Pharmaceutical executive named Hendrik Corman. He was about to testify before Congress about corruption in military medical contracts. He died in a car accident in Baltimore. Official report said brake failure. "Let me guess," the FBI investigator said. "The brake failure was arranged." "Master Sergeant Coulter has entry 742 in his journal," Reeves confirmed. Corman was liquidated because he was about to expose that military hospitals were being billed by contractors at rates 300% above market value. The profit margin was being split between the contractors and the military officers approving the contracts. She pulled up another file. This one involved a journalist investigating arms trafficking. This one involved an Afghan official requesting audit of American military expenditures. This one involved... She stopped, her hands were shaking. It was entry number 52 in Coulter's journal. The entry that had no tally mark because Coulter hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. Major Thomas ELLIS, REQUESTING court-martial investigation into Coulter's kill authorization RATIOS, marked for elimination. "This was Major Ellis," Reeves said quietly. "He was in my unit. He noticed that Coulter's targets weren't matching the threat profiles. He was going to file a formal complaint." "What happened to him?" the investigator asked. "Car accident, same as the others, staged to look accidental." "Who authorized it?" Reeves pulled up a document, an email from General Webb to a civilian contractor. "Ellis has become a liability. Handle it." The investigation had found the bodies underneath the machinery. Dozens of them. Not just the 73 in Coulter's journal, but additional deaths, accidental deaths, suicides ruled as such, car accidents that had been arranged with surgical precision. The conspiracy didn't just kill its targets. It killed anyone who noticed the pattern. Back at the safe house, Hendricks was watching the coverage on every news channel simultaneously. CNN, 3 senators expelled from Senate facing murder charges. Fox, Pentagon reels as military corruption exposed at HIGHEST levels. MSNBC, WEBB Suicide Prevention Watch, former general faces 150 counts. General Marcus Webb had attempted suicide after his arrest, was now under medical observation, was facing charges that carried the potential for life sentences or execution. Hendricks felt nothing watching this. No satisfaction, no vindication, just the understanding that Webb was another victim of the same system that had victimized everyone else, victimized by his own complicity, by the seduction of power and profit, by the understanding that the rules that applied to normal people didn't apply to those at the top. Coulter entered the room, and Hendricks could see the strain in the master sergeant's face. "We're being requested for congressional testimony," Coulter said. "Public session, full media coverage. The committee wants us to walk through the entire operation, the targeting, the authorization, the cover-up." "How many cameras?" Hendricks asked. "Hundreds, international feed. This is going to be watched by the entire world." Hendricks nodded slowly. "Then we make sure they see everything. We make sure there's no possibility of hiding what happened." "Yes, sir." "Coulter," Hendricks said, "I need to ask you something. When you put on that badge, when Captain Reeves gave you that forbidden insignia, what did you think was going to happen?" Coulter was quiet for a long moment. "I thought I was going to destroy you, sir. I thought I was going to force you to choose between your career and the truth. I thought you'd choose your career, and then I'd have proof that the system couldn't be reformed from within, that it had to be torn down completely." "But I chose the truth," Hendricks said. "Eventually, sir, yes." "What if I hadn't?" "Then Captain Reeves and I would have gone to the media directly. We would have leaked everything. It would have been messier, slower, but it would have happened eventually. Because the truth doesn't stay buried. It always finds a way to the surface." Hendricks moved to the window. Outside, federal agents were watching the perimeter, protecting him. He was no longer a fugitive. He was a witness in protective custody. The military was no longer hunting him. It was prosecuting itself, using his testimony as the weapon. "Are we winning?" Hendricks asked quietly. "Politically, yes, sir. The administration is distancing itself from Webb and the senators. Congress is demanding reforms. The media is calling for congressional oversight of military operations." "But," Hendricks prompted. "But the system is still there, sir. The contractors still exist. The profit motive still exists. The next general who comes along will find ways to obscure the same pattern. Different names, different operations, different cover stories. But the fundamental corruption, the understanding that military authority can be weaponized for personal gain, that's institutional, that's structural, that's built into the system itself." Hendricks understood. They'd exposed a conspiracy. They'd arrested the conspirators. But they hadn't actually changed the system that had made the conspiracy possible. "So what comes after?" Hendricks asked. "After we testify, after the convictions, what's left?" "Redemption," Coulter replied. "Not for us, for the system, and that's going to take longer than any of us have left." Hendricks looked at his master sergeant, this man who'd orchestrated his own destruction and emergence as a penitent instrument of justice. "Do you think it's possible?" Hendricks asked. "Real redemption?" "I don't know, sir," Coulter replied. "But I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure that out." Outside, the darkness was absolute, but somewhere in that darkness, cameras were being positioned. Hearing rooms were being prepared. The machinery of accountability was grinding forward, imperfect, incomplete, but moving. The fight back had begun. And for the first time since this all started, Hendricks felt something that might have been hope. Or might have been the last lie the system told itself before the real reckoning began. The federal courthouse was surrounded by protesters. Some called for Hendricks' execution. Others called for his exoneration. The truth, as always, was more complicated than either side wanted to admit. The gallery was packed. Media, military officers, families of victims. Hendricks could see them in the front row, the parents of Hassan Malik, the journalist who'd been killed investigating corruption. They were both in their 70s, their faces etched with the particular exhaustion of people whose child's death had finally been acknowledged as a murder rather than an accident. Across from them sat Hendricks' ex-wife and adult children. They didn't look at him. They'd made their position clear through their attorneys. They were present as observers, not as family members seeking mercy. Judge Catherine Morrison sat on the bench, her face a mask of judicial impassivity. She'd been selected specifically for this case. A judge with no prior military connections, no ties to the conspiracy, no reason to show leniency to a man who'd authorized assassinations. "Does the prosecution wish to present its case?" Judge Morrison asked. The prosecutor, a woman named Victoria Santos, stood. She was methodical, precise. She walked through Hendricks' career like an autopsy, cutting through the myth of the distinguished admiral to expose the machinery underneath. "Admiral Hendricks authorized 73 targeted killings," Santos began, her voice carrying through the courtroom with practiced force. "These are not disputed facts. These are documented in military files in the Coulter Journal, in email exchanges between the Admiral and General Webb. 73 individuals. Some were terrorists. Many were not." She pulled up a photograph on the courtroom screens. Hassan Malik, the journalist, his wife, 3 children. Hassan Malik was 32 years old when Admiral Hendricks signed the authorization that resulted in his death. Malik's crime: he was investigating corruption in military medical contracts. He was a threat to profit margins. She pulled up another photograph. An Afghan government official named Rashid Karami. Rashid Karami requested an audit of American military expenditures in Afghanistan. He was assassinated 2 weeks after his request was filed. Master Sergeant Coulter has identified him as target number 47 in his journal. Santos continued for 3 hours, walking through each name, each death, each authorization that had come across Admiral Hendricks' desk. Not abstract numbers, real people, real families, real consequences. When she finished, there was silence in the courtroom. The defense attorney, a man named Robert Harrison, stood to present the Admiral's case. "Admiral Hendricks did not act alone," Harrison argued. "He operated within a chain of command that extended above him. He received authorization from the Joint Chiefs. He operated under guidelines approved by congressional oversight committees. Whatever moral failures occurred, they occurred within a system that bore collective responsibility." It was a reasonable defense. It was also exactly the defense Hendricks had prepared his attorney to avoid. Harrison was still speaking when Hendricks stood up. "Your Honor, I need to interrupt my own defense." Judge Morrison looked at him sharply. "Sit down, Admiral, your attorney." "I'm instructing my attorney to stand down, Your Honor," Hendricks said, his voice clear in the silent courtroom. "I'm going to testify in my own behalf, and I'm going to tell this court the truth." Harrison looked stricken. "Admiral, this is a grave mistake." "I'm aware," Hendricks replied. He took the stand himself, raising his hand to swear to tell the truth. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. "Admiral Hendricks," Santos began, her voice carrying the weight of opportunity, "are you aware of the consequences of perjuring yourself?" "Yes." "Are you aware that anything you say can and will be used against you in sentencing?" "Yes." "Then, Admiral, did you knowingly authorize the killing of Hassan Malik?" Hendricks looked directly at Hassan Malik's parents. "Yes, I did." The courtroom erupted, not in shock. Everyone already knew this. But there was something powerful about hearing an admiral, a man of rank and authority, simply admit it. "Did you believe Hassan Malik was a threat to national security?" Santos asked. "No." "Did you believe he was a threat to someone's profit margins?" Hendricks' attorney stood up to object, but Hendricks raised his hand. "I don't need my attorney to shield me from this question. Yes, I believed he was a threat to military contractors' profit margins. That's why I signed the authorization." "And you knew this at the time?" "I suspected it. I chose not to investigate further because investigating would have required me to act, and acting would have cost me my career." The admission hung in the courtroom like a confession in a cathedral. "Admiral," Santos continued, "did you understand that by signing these authorizations, you were facilitating murder?" Hendricks took a moment. His hands were steady on the witness stand, but his voice wavered. "Deep in my gut, yes. I knew. I knew the justifications didn't add up. I knew the casualty counts were too high for the stated objectives. I knew the targets didn't match the threat profiles. I chose not to look too closely because looking would have required me to be a different kind of man than I wanted to be." Hassan Malik's mother put her hand over her mouth. Her husband put his arm around her. "Did you ever express these doubts to your superiors?" Santos asked. "No." "Why not?" "Because expressing doubt would have meant accepting responsibility, and I wasn't ready to accept responsibility. I was comfortable in my position. I was respected. I had authority, and I wasn't willing to risk any of that for people I'd never met." Hendricks looked directly at Hassan Malik's parents again. "I'm profoundly sorry. That's meaningless, I know. But I need you to understand that your son's death was a choice. My choice. And I've spent the last weeks understanding the weight of that choice, and I'll spend the rest of my life understanding it." The cross-examination was mercifully brief. Hendricks' own attorney, recognizing that his client had just destroyed any chance of acquittal, simply asked, "Admiral, do you have anything else you wish to tell the court?" Hendricks nodded. "Yes, I want to make clear that my actions were not aberrations. They were the logical conclusion of a system that rewards complicity and punishes conscience. General Webb didn't become corrupt. He was selected for command because he was the kind of man who could be corrupted. I wasn't forced to sign these authorizations. I was enabled, and I took that enablement as permission." He paused. "The only way to prevent this from happening again is to dismantle the system that makes it possible. Not to punish individuals, though punishment is necessary, but to fundamentally reform how military authorization works, how oversight is implemented, how conscience is protected rather than punished." Captain Sarah Reeves testified next. Her testimony was clinical, precise. She walked through the financial structures that had made the conspiracy profitable, the shell companies, the cryptocurrency accounts, the profit-sharing arrangements between senators and military contractors. When asked about her own role, Reeves said simply, "I was a soldier following orders until I realized the orders were crimes. Then I became someone who exposed those crimes. I regret nothing about that choice." Master Sergeant James Coulter testified last. The courtroom was completely silent as he walked through his journal, each name, each target, each decision to pull the trigger. His face never changed. His voice never wavered. He spoke about 73 people as if reciting an inventory, which was exactly what Coulter had learned to do. "Did you ever question your orders?" Santos asked. "Continuously," Coulter replied, "but I continued following them." "Why?" "Because questioning orders gets you removed from service. Because the system is designed to eliminate people who question. Because I was trained to be a weapon, and weapons don't question. They execute." "Do you regret any of your kills?" Coulter was quiet for a long moment. "I regret all of them. Some I regret because the targets didn't deserve it. All of them I regret because they made me something less than human." The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, abuse of military authority, fraud, 25 charges, 25 guilty verdicts. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for 1 week later. Hendricks sat in the courtroom gallery, his wrists in handcuffs, watching the families of victims weep. Some weeping with vindication, others weeping because no verdict could bring their loved ones back. His ex-wife caught his eye from across the courtroom. She nodded once, not forgiveness but acknowledgement, the recognition that at least at the end he'd had the courage to see what he'd done. As Hendricks was being escorted from the courtroom, Coulter caught his eye. The master sergeant didn't nod, didn't offer any gesture of connection, just locked eyes for a moment, two men who destroyed each other and each other's world in pursuit of something that might have been justice. That night in his holding cell, Hendricks watched news coverage of the trial. Admiral admits to authorizing ASSASSINATIONS. WBB, Empire COLLAPSES under weight of evidence. Senate DE, May NDS military reform following corruption scandal. The media was calling it a victory for accountability, but Hendricks understood the darker truth. They'd exposed a conspiracy, but the system that had created it was still intact, still operational, still waiting for the next general who understood how to exploit it. In another holding cell, Coulter was reading newspaper accounts of his testimony. In another location, Reeves was being prepared for her role in federal protection. They'd won, the truth had prevailed, the conspiracy had collapsed. But somewhere in the machinery of that victory, something essential had been lost, the understanding that justice, when it comes at a price too high to truly celebrate. 5 years later. Federal Penitentiary, Minimum Security Facility. Hendricks was 63 years old now, his hair completely white, his posture stooped from years of understanding that his body no longer belonged to him. The uniform he wore was prison gray instead of military blue. The badge on his chest was nothing, just a number identifying him as inmate 847,329. The visiting room was sparse. Metal tables, plastic chairs, guards standing at discreet distances, watching but not listening. The man across from him was Master Sergeant James Coulter, here on a regular visitation schedule because they were both serving sentences in the same facility. Coulter had 6 more years left on his 20. Hendricks had served 5 already and had 15 more stretching ahead. They didn't shake hands. The guards didn't allow physical contact, and even if they had, neither man would have crossed that boundary. I read about the new legislation, Coulter said. His voice was different now, softer, less tactical. Prison had done something to him that capture never had. It had allowed him to stop being a weapon. The Congressional Oversight Bill passed. Captain Reeves testified that it was the strongest protection against black ops authorization she'd ever seen. Hendricks nodded. They're requiring 3-level approval for any targeted killing. Military, civilian oversight, and judicial review. It won't stop corruption entirely, but it makes it harder. That's something, Coulter said. Is it? Hendricks replied. Or are we just convincing ourselves that we've fixed something that requires far deeper reformation? Coulter looked at his former commanding officer with something that might have been understanding. I've had 5 years to think about that question, sir. I don't have an answer. But I'll tell you what I know. 14 soldiers have been reassigned from special operations because they reported uncomfortable orders. That's 14 potential murders that didn't happen. That's 14 families that still have their sons. And how many soldiers have been silenced? Hendricks asked quietly. How many have learned that reporting corruption gets you destroyed? All of them, Coulter admitted, which is why the legislation matters, because now they have institutional protection. Now they can report without disappearing. The conversation moved forward, updates on their cases, appeals being filed, the slow machinery of the legal system continuing to grind. Hendricks was no longer news. The headline that had consumed the nation was now a historical footnote, something studied in military academies and congressional history courses. "Captain Reeves is getting married," Coulter said. "Did you hear?" Hendricks shook his head. "To who?" "Another officer from her unit. Someone who also understood what the conspiracy meant. They're buying a farm in Vermont. She sent me an invitation." Coulter paused. "She wanted to invite you too, but the Bureau of Prisons didn't approve the request." Hendricks felt a strange emotion, something between grief and relief. Reeves had moved on, had found a way to reconstruct a life from the pieces of what had been destroyed. She'd survived the conspiracy, exposed it, and emerged the only one of the three who'd retained anything of the person she'd been before. "She earned that," Hendricks said quietly. "She deserves peace." "She asked me to tell you something," Coulter continued. "She said that the badge, the one she gave me that started all of this, she's making replicas. Not for kills, for people who have refused orders they thought were unjust, for soldiers who have stepped out of line to protect their conscience instead of protecting their career." Hendricks felt his chest tighten. "That's dangerous, anyone caught with—" "It's not official," Coulter interrupted. "It's quietly distributed, soldier to soldier, a symbol that someone had the courage to question, a reminder that conscience can be more powerful than rank." "And you're part of this?" Hendricks asked. "In my way, yes. I've made contact with 14 soldiers here in prison. All of them are serving time for refusing illegal orders or for exposing corruption. We're creating a network. When we get out, when we return to civilian life, we're going to advocate for the kinds of reforms that could actually prevent another conspiracy like the one we exposed." Hendricks understood what Coulter was saying. They hadn't just failed to reform the system, they'd become a different kind of weapon. Not instruments of death, but instruments of institutional change. The badge that Reeves had created wasn't a trophy anymore. It was a revolutionary symbol. "Will it work?" Hendricks asked. "Probably not," Coulter replied, "but it's the only thing we have left to try." 6 months later, Hendricks received a letter. The envelope was plain, no return address. Inside was a single page, handwritten in careful script. "Admiral, I wanted you to know that I've seen the farm we're buying. It's beautiful, 100 acres, all of it currently unused. I'm planning to plant vegetables, real food that keeps people alive instead of weapons that kill them. Coulter told me that you've been studying philosophy, that you're reading about institutional corruption, about systemic change, about whether individual conscience can ever overcome institutional gravity. I want you to know that I believe it can, not completely, not permanently, but incrementally, gradually, through the accumulation of small acts of resistance. The badge has become something I never intended. It's become a symbol of refusal, not refusal to serve, but refusal to become complicit. 17 soldiers are currently wearing replicas, not because they killed for the right reasons, but because they had the courage to question why they were killing at all. That's what I wanted from you, Admiral, not redemption. I don't believe in redemption for what we did, but recognition, understanding, the knowledge that we can change what we are even if we can't undo what we've done. I'm sending you a replica of the badge. I want you to understand what it means now. It's not about achievement. It's about the moment when you finally stop being a weapon and start being a man." Reeves. Enclosed with the letter was a small package. Hendricks opened it carefully. The badge was small, perhaps 3 inches across. It bore the same symbol that had started everything. But now it carried a different weight, not the weight of kills, not the weight of conspiracy, but the weight of refusal. Hendricks held it in his palm and understood finally what the badge meant. It wasn't a monument to what had been destroyed. It was a symbol of what could still be built. 15 years later. Admiral Marcus Hendricks, now a civilian, stood in front of a lecture hall at Georgetown University. The students were studying military corruption, institutional reform, and the case that had changed American military oversight policy. The lesson, Hendricks told them, is not that individual conscience defeated institutional corruption. That would be a lie. What actually happened is that individual conscience exposed the mechanics of that corruption clearly enough that some institutional reforms became politically possible. He paused. The conspiracy continues, in different forms with different names with different methods of obfuscation, but it continues. The only thing that has actually changed is our ability to recognize it, and recognition, while it doesn't solve the problem, does make denial impossible. One of the students raised her hand. Do you regret what you did, the 73 people you authorized killed? Hendricks looked directly at her. Every single day, and I regret the institutional reforms that stopped 74 others from being killed. Both are true. The regret doesn't undo the crime, but the institutional change does prevent future crimes. I don't receive redemption for the first set, but I can accept responsibility for enabling the second set. Master Sergeant James Coulter was released after 19 years. He walked out of the federal penitentiary with nothing but the clothes on his back and a name that had become synonymous with military corruption. The farm in Vermont was waiting for him. Captain Sarah Reeves and her husband, Colonel Michael Torres, had prepared a room for him, not as a tenant but as a partner. The three of them, Reeves, Torres, and Coulter, began the work of creating something tangible, a place where soldiers could come to process what they'd experienced, where conscience was protected rather than punished, where the badge, now widely recognized as a symbol of moral refusal, meant something concrete. Coulter never killed again. He spent his life helping others who'd been shaped by violence to find peace. He died at 82, peacefully, in a bed on the Vermont farm, surrounded by Reeves and Torres and 17 soldiers whose lives had been changed by the understanding that conscience is a more powerful weapon than any rifle. Admiral Marcus Hendricks died in his sleep at 81, 5 years after his release from prison. His funeral was small. His ex-wife didn't attend, though their children did. They'd forgiven him, though forgiveness had taken longer than any of them expected. The badge, the one that had started everything, the one that Reeves had created as a symbol of refusal, was placed on his casket by a young soldier who'd been inspired by Hendricks' final lectures about institutional courage. Somewhere in the Pentagon, generals and admirals made calculations about how to prevent the next Hendricks, the next Coulter, the next Reeves. They would fail. They always did. Because conscience can't be fully eliminated from the system, only managed, contained, redirected. But the badge, that symbol of refusal, would persist, passed hand to hand among soldiers who understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is say no. The story of the admiral who was forbidden a badge, the sniper who kept a kill count, and the captain who refused to disappear became a legend in military culture. It was taught in ethics courses. It was debated in congressional committees. It was the story that every new officer heard about what happens when conscience meets corruption. But the true ending wasn't about victory. It wasn't about redemption or closure or the triumph of justice. The true ending was simpler. It was the understanding that some battles can't be won, only fought. That institutional corruption can't be cured, only managed. That the best we can do is create space for conscience to exist, even if we can't guarantee it will prevail. The badge remained, the symbol remained, the refusal remained. And somewhere in the future, another soldier would hold that badge and understand that the choice Hendricks, Coulter, and Reeves had made, the choice to see, to expose, to accept the consequences, would echo across decades, preventing some murders, inspiring some courage, making some small difference in a system that seemed designed to resist change. That wasn't redemption, but it was something,